I think it's often said that prayer meetings often include the knees, the elbows, head and shoulders, knees and toes, because it seems like it's easier to sometimes pray for our sickness and our physical ailment. So why is that? Why is it easier to ask for prayer for sickness more than other things? What do you guys think? Why do those prayers are easy to share and to ask for than other things at times?
Because it's common amongst people to everybody gets sick.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can see it.
Yeah, very visible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more obvious or immediate kind of.
Yeah. I see an idea in there, Alan. Why is it easier to share prayer requests about sickness than other things?
Because then everyone gets sick?
Yeah. I think, but for the most part too, no matter what you do, you can't make sickness go away right away. No matter what the little, you go to the medicine aisle in Target. They have all different kinds of ways how to make colds disappear instantly, how to make arthritis go away, and none of it works instantly, does it? Even the stuff that works well, it always takes time. And I think there's a desperation that comes with that. Like, there's nothing like sickness that reminds us how weak we are. This is a quote from C.S. Lewis, very quotable C.S. Lewis, talking about the problem of pain. He says, "We can rest contentedly in our sins and in our stupidities. And anyone who has watched gluttons shoveling down the most exquisite food as if they did not know what they were eating will admit that we can even ignore pleasure. But pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." Isn't that true? Like, pain has a way of making us go, "Oh, I need God," right? And I think we're more apt to share it with other people because, we're like, "Man, this is hurting me. I need you to pray for me because I need God right now." And at the end of Luke 8, we see two examples of two people who are desperately going to Jesus and begging him because they have some great sicknesses, some great physical ailments, that they're like, we can do nothing about this. They're desperate. And I think this is the kind of the key point here, is that we should not be afraid to be desperate ourselves, whether it is, we'll see, like physical issues, but even Jesus takes it back to the spiritual issues as he tells the woman, your faith has saved you spiritually. So, just a quick reminder where we are in this book. The ESV Study Bible does a great job of laying out this section that we're in the ministry of Jesus in Galilee. So Jesus is in the north. He's going to start moving around here in a little bit. But he's in this section of showing his great power. He is the Lord of nature, demons, disease, and death. So we saw him calm a storm in 22 through 25. Then he healed a demon-possessed man. And now he's going to heal a woman in Jairus' daughter. And after he's just finished, he's showing how great he is. Then he turns to the disciples and says, in chapter 9, go, tell everyone else what you've seen. So he's preparing them to believe he is greater. He is worthy of trust. He is to be followed. Okay. Today, we're going to have these two incidents which reveal our need to trust Jesus' power and his plan. I don't know if we'll get to the plan part. We'll see. His power and his plan. So let's read Luke 8, starting in verse 40, talking about the great need. Can someone read Luke 80, 40, and through 42?
Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying.
So, we're setting the scene. first. What's happening, and then why do these characters and people get mentioned? So we have the crowd is pressing in upon Jesus really strongly. You look down your Bible, you say, Jesus returned. Look back up. Where did he return from? Look back up at verse 26. Where did that last section happen? The country of the Gerasenes. So, if you recall, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake of Tiberias, over to here in a more Gentile region because Jesus was exhausted. He had been preaching and teaching, proclaiming the truth, and in Matthew 8:18 it says, Jesus saw a crowd around him. He gave orders to go over to the other side because Jesus was exhausted. He was so exhausted, he slept through a life-threatening storm. Remember, the disciples are in the middle of this lake, and they've all spent their life on this lake, and they're saying they're going to die, and Jesus is asleep because he's that tired. So again, that's why he leaves. He was exhausted, and now he heads back, and you know what happens as soon as his feet touch the ground? The crowds come again, and they're swarming him. I like this picture. This is a picture from the 1930s of a crowd in Israel just gathering. And you'll see right at the beginning it says, the crowd welcomed him. The word means to accept or receive with great warmth. They're like, yay, Jesus is back! And they swarm him. It's interesting because Jesus is showing us both the fact of the need for rest and for returning to ministry. Because notice Jesus escapes because he is human. He gets tired just like you and I get tired. And he takes time to sleep and escape. He's not like, oh, well, some people say, well, you can sleep when you're dead. No, Jesus is sleeping so that he can die at some point. That's his point. But then he arrives in the Gerasenes, and you know what he did? He started ministering because there was a man who needed him. Then he turns back around, heads back, and he shows up here, and here's a man, or a group of people, but then a civic man who needs him. And so he serves. You guys remember, how was he treated by the Gerasenes? What did they think about Jesus?
They're freaked out.
They freaked out, right? Look a little bit ahead. Go back to verse 37. So they had great fear, and what did they ask Jesus to do? Get on out of here! Like, please leave! Isn't it interesting? Like, Jesus escaped a large crowd that wanted him, goes and finds another large crowd that doesn't want him, and so gets in a boat and comes back to that large crowd again. Like, he's just having to bounce all over the place, and he's getting different reactions from different people. Now, here, this crowd is pressing on him. Doing this little, I like these little charts, they're helpful, but the word press means the idea of, like, grabbing. It can be understood as choking, like choking out. You're pressing so hard. It means this ongoing pushing against him. They want to touch him. They want to be with him. They want to hear him, and they're pushing over each other. It's a huge mess of people. And verse 41 then comes about. Now, in the original Greek language, it starts off with the phrase, and behold. That doesn't get translated into English because that sounds weird in English, but it is supposed to be drawing attention. It's like, hey, pay attention. A single man walks up. And he gets Jesus' attention in the midst of this crowd because we have a father's humility honored. Verses 41 and 42, Jairus was an important man. He had the title of ruler of the synagogue. And the synagogue, this is a recreation of the synagogue in Capernaum. Synagogues were the local gathering places of Jews. And the ruler is an important title. He's the boss. The person was supposed to take care of the synagogue services. He would select those who would lead in prayer. He himself would read scripture. He would select who would preach. He was the man of eminence among the community because he selected the order of service each time. We read about people like this in Acts 13:15. It says, Paul's going around from place to place. He shows up at a synagogue. Acts 13:15. After reading from the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent a message to Paul saying, "Brothers, if you have any word of encouragement for the people, say it." So they're asking them, they're deciding who gets to speak. An important role. In the temple synagogue, for example, the ruler was the third officer in rank, the high priest being the first, the chief priest being the second, and then the ruler. And in provincial synagogues, the ruler was the number one person. He was number one shot. And no one was eligible for the office unless they had a certificate from the Great Sanhedrin, the ruling government, stating that he possessed all the required qualifications. So you had to go through training, you had to go through authorization to get this job. And the Capernaum synagogue was known as being incredibly impressive. It was on Galilee where there was lots of trade. The ruins of it still lasted to today. So I want us to think, how could this position be one of pride? How could Jairus be proud of his position as ruler of the synagogue?
He doesn't need an answer to anybody.
He doesn't. He is the boss of his church, as it were. He's powerful in it.
How do people look up?
Mm-hmm. Who taught the people of Israel about the Bible? Mm-hmm. And he'd bring in different priests and Pharisees, and who selected who would get to speak to the people? He did. Now, what do the Pharisees think about Jesus right now? Not very well. They're being very antagonistic. So here's this guy who's selecting these people to come and teach. He's important. Right? But Jairus is incredibly humbled by his situation. Falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. A statue in the first century of a girl about that age, 12-year-old daughter, dying. The word means approaching death, so this is a desperate, imminent time. He falls at Jesus' feet saying, "Help me, Jesus," right? There's nothing like death and dying to awaken us from the slumber of daily existence to a reality of a world gone painfully wrong. I think at times it's very easy to just go about your life and just think everything's okay. We have our chores to do, we have errands to run, we have jobs to do, we get a paycheck, we get food, we're busy.
Recording in progress.
Might want to mute that.
No, I just called me earlier, said she could get it.
Yeah, hey, Victor, can you take that outside if you're gonna have it on and you play with it, because it's gonna cause feedback and it's gonna hurt.
Sorry.
You got it turned off?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, man. Okay, I don't want to blow anyone's ears. I don't think we really need a big image. Just put ourselves in the mind of this man who's a father and a mother. Mother feels great weakness. Her child is dying, can do nothing to stop it. And the father is helpless alongside his wife, unable to stop his child from dying, unable to help his wife in his heartache. Imagine the man's desperation, right? His pain. But imagine the humility it took to ask, to go to this podunk preacher who has no authorization, no schooling, no approval, and is actually despised by a lot of people, and ask him to come and help. Let's think, what kind of pride keeps us from publicly bringing our needs to Jesus before others? Like, why do we not want to share our prayer requests for other people? What kind of pride keeps us from bringing our prayer requests before other people?
Shame.
Shame? How so? Why is it shameful to say those things?
Because human beings, we are very proud of ourselves, so feel embarrassed to confess our needs before the Lord
Mm-hmm.
and from others.
Yeah.
So that's a shame, but I think it is. We don't have that, put ourselves in very low position from others. You have to have courage. Yeah, I like need to do that in front of people. Like in Jericho, they say, yeah, he did in front, because he was a principal of the synagogue, that's
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Top dog.
His pain and his need that was so desperate, he don't even think it twice. He believed in Jesus. It was the only option. He don't have another one, and he just go through that. When you don't have that point of the desperation, you hold back, you proud because you don't want to feel embarrassed in front of people,
Yeah.
hearing your weakness.
No.
You know, so.
I'm not desperate enough. I don't really need this. I'm trying this, and this first. I'm trying to do it on my own first.
That's right.
Right?
A lot of people look up to you or depend on you. You might, you'd hate to let them down. This maybe one side of it, or you hate to look weak. And it might be the other side. Is, well, I'm the guy that's supposed to solve all the problems, or I'm supposed to have all the answers, and I don't have the answers, and I can't solve the problem. Some people would rather be die than admit either of those. So, in this case, it's his daughter. So it's he had to for his daughter.
And also, like we are human beings, we feel embarrassed, like other people judge us.
Mhm.
Oh, look at what happened to her. Oh, I can't believe it what she did.
Yeah.
Or Jimmy, you know, or what he did,
Mhm.
or something like that. They judge you, you know. So we are afraid.
What-
Our own human beings.
Yeah.
You know, so.
One of my favorite excuses were like, oh, that person is going in for counseling from the pastors. What could be wrong with that person? Like, what's wrong with you that you're not? We constantly need that. We need each other. And God says that his body is his ministry to one another, to pray for one another. We're supposed to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ.
But
So,
sometimes you just want the pastors. You
Mhm.
don't want, it's like you have great wisdom.
Yeah.
You have the right words. And if you point out sin, you do it in a way that's, it doesn't sound so judgmental. It just sounds like you're concerned for your soul.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
yeah, and I think that's usually, we're all trying to bring someone to Christ. And perhaps there's time like, okay, this person can do it better, or maybe they can. Sometimes it's not necessarily the pastors who can help best. Sometimes it's someone who's been through that situation and walked through it, and God's shown them mercy, and they actually can be more merciful. But sometimes like you do need the right person at times. That's true. So what other reasons can you try and give someone why they should not be ashamed, but pray about their difficulties, to take them to Jesus, even in front of other people, to not be ashamed like Jairus is unashamed? Why should someone do that?
Maybe somebody else has gone through the same thing and
Mhm.
hasn't talked about it, and they feel, they might be able to share, there might be some knowledge or
Yeah,
encouragement or something from that.
yeah.
I think so the main thing is fear. Fear to confess.
Mm.
What I said before, we have to meditate in That's right.
We talked about Proverbs 29:13, that he who conceals his 29:6. He who conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will find mercy. And mercy is found when you are willing to say it. That I think, we want people praying for us, that the prayers of a righteous man actually do accomplish something, God says. So get people praying for you. Don't be afraid of it. Maybe there's times like, this is a prayer request that's more like a group of 2 or 3 people. This is not a whole church prayer request. That's okay. That's okay. There are some times where you're like, hey, this is a prayer request. You put on Facebook. You send out an emails. You get anyone and everyone praying for this because this is like some wisdom. Sometimes it's no. You need to know what level to bring this. But there's almost nothing that you shouldn't have at least one other person praying for you. There's got to be something. Like maybe you could think of an example. We can talk about that later. But I think for the most part, so many people are willing to go to Jesus publicly. The only person who comes by night is Nicodemus because he's ashamed. And Jesus is like, what are you doing, Nicodemus? You know better than this, right? Everyone else says, who cares, right? So, Jesus is with the man. Jesus can do miracles. Everything's going to be okay now. Prayer answered, right? Well, except for the fact that there is a great delay. 43 through 48. And we've got to read this story. If we read the story from Jairus' perspective, we'll see this, and it's taken long, that actually there's this great stop. We're like, what is going on here? So can someone read 43 through 48? The story of the woman.
And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of the garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, who was it that touched me? When all denied it, Peter said, Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you. But Jesus said, someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me. And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she became trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace.
Okay, let's walk through this story. This woman has great need, right? Now, and you just picture you've never read this story before. You've never heard it, and you're reading for the first time. You're hearing this for the first time. And you got this thing, you have this great need, this girl is dying, they're rushing to go to her, to save her, and another character comes barging into the scene. This woman. I will come to these other guys in a little bit, but here we're focusing on Jairus and his daughter, and this hemorrhaging woman enters the picture. The little girl is 12 years old, and this woman has been hemorrhaging for those 12 years. We actually know nothing about this woman outside of this small account, though church history would later call her Veronica. I don't know why. I was trying to track that down, why she's called Veronica, but someone gave her the name Veronica at some point. And we don't exactly know what's wrong with her. It's a hemorrhage, or the literal translation is just the coming of blood. It can mean a cut, it can mean a nosebleed, but for the most part, it refers to a woman's menstrual cycle, the constant bleeding that comes from that. And for whatever reason, she has been bleeding repeatedly and consistently for 12 years. And the doctors have no idea why. Doctors had different tools. These are some ancient tools you can find in archaeology of them working at it. And so they would poke and prod, and we're not told if something started this. Like, Was there a mistake that she made on her part? Or something outside of her power that happened? We don't know. All we know is there's been no solution for 12 years. Though she repeatedly went to treatment, doctor after doctor, nothing. Now, does anyone remember what Luke's job was? He was a physician. He's a doctor. So perhaps he's a little nicer than Mark, because look, he says here in Luke 8 that she had spent all her living on physicians. Okay, she spent all her money and nothing worked. Mark says she had suffered much under many physicians and spent all she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. So you're like, all right, Luke, are you trying to soften the blow here a little bit? Because you're like, oh, they didn't make her suffer. Mark's just like, she suffered. They poked and they prodded and they tested and they tried and they beat her and they bled her and whatever else they did. It was horrendous. And in the end, nothing. Let's again put our mind in her shoes. How does it feel when you've gone to the doctor after doctor without answer? Describe the feelings of going to doctor and no answer, and the problem might even get worse.
Hopelessness.
Hopelessness? Mm-hmm. What else?
Please begin, I'm sorry.
How does someone feel when they go to doctor after doctor without any answer? It doesn't get any better, it might get worse.
You lose all your hope.
Mm-hmm.
There's no more hope, no more.
Yeah.
You just spent a lot of money for nothing.
Yeah, a lot of money. You're like, where did my money go? Just desperate, depressed.
Does that happen all the time now?
I think it still does. Like as much as I appreciate certain physicians who say that they practice medicine rather than they perfect it, because they're like we try, but we don't actually. A lot of the times we're guessing, we're trying our best. But as much as we might want to arrogantly think like we have all the answers in medicine world, there are millions of things that are wrong with people, and they can't figure it out. Right? You go and you go and you go. So this is not an uncommon thing. But for this woman, there's a religious element as well. Not only is she physically suffering, the law of the Old Testament required that a woman who were unclean were considered unclean during the regular flow of their menstrual period. So in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25 and 27, if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanness. As in the days of her impurity, she shall be unclean. Every bed which she lies, all the days of her discharge, shall be to her as a bed of her impurity. And everything on which she sits shall be unclean, as in the uncleanness of her menstrual impurity. And whoever touches these things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. So, again, this during a regular menstrual period, but also if there's anything else that comes about, she is unclean. Now, to be ceremonially unclean was not to be sinful. If it was handled correctly, it would not lead to sin. If you handled it incorrectly, it would lead to sin. Kind of like a temptation. You think of like temptation. Something comes up, an image, something you want, like a commercial comes up on TV, and you see that and you're tempted to desire it, and you know you shouldn't. And you go, no, that's wrong. I'm not going to go there. Or you see something, someone leave, like at a store, and someone leaves something sitting out there, and you could just grab it and march off, and the thought even occurs into your head, oh, I could just grab that and go. But you don't. You didn't sin. You were tempted, and you overcame that sin, right? In the same way, that's what uncleanness is. Uncleanness is a marker of saying, all right, here's something, don't go to the temple. You're unclean, stay away from the temple. Coming into blood meant no sacrifices for a while. So you were to not go here to the temple, you were to stay in your home, purify yourself. So, in God's eyes, is this woman sinful for bleeding all the time? No. But imagine someone comes along. They walk by this woman. They're touched by this woman. They look at her. They notice she's bleeding. And now they're not able to go to the temple for the day they were planning on to. How might they have felt if they bump into this woman and she's bleeding and they are now unclean?
You now made me unclean.
Yeah.
I can't go to the temple.
Yeah.
You were selfish.
They blame you selfish. How would they treat this woman then? Rejected her. Now imagine every single day, or at least repeatedly, multiple times a year, over and this isn't just like a, all right, hey, I know the cycle is the time of day, so it's a constant without warning. This woman is being shamed and hated by everyone around her because she is inconveniencing them. Is she sinning against them? No, but she's inconveniencing them. You see that? And they start to treat her a certain way. After a while, what does that do to a person to be constantly treated that way? You are the annoyance.
Yeah.
What?
Huge problem. I mean, you're being antisocial, you're going to see yourself as an outcast,
Yeah.
bitter, or...
So this woman, desperately weak, he said she's depressed and she's isolated. Because she goes by friends, she goes by family. Anyone she goes near becomes unclean. They can't do the religious duty. And they're just like, just so annoying. Can't you just stay away? So imagine, you actually love this woman. You're her. She's your sister, your mother, your friend. And you hear Jesus is coming back to town. What would you tell her to do when Jesus comes by? Go to him, okay? And do what?
Sleep.
Ask.
Ask, yeah?
Speak.
Say, go ask him, right? Try. Could there be any downside to going to Jesus, though? Like what?
Well, because now she has to be amongst people with all the crowds.
Yeah.
And touching them and infecting them.
Mm-hmm.
And being subject to being ridiculed. For
Yeah.
making them clean. She didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Because she knew he was the Messiah.
Yeah. And I think that's why it exemplifies in verse 44 her great faith. Because this is not just desperation. This is a desperation, and I think this is the answer. And I'm willing to risk more for the sake of this answer. Anyone will do anything when they're desperate. People go to crazy faith healers all the time when they're desperate. But usually they're like, I have nothing left to lose. This woman still has more to lose. Let's see why. Verse 44, she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately the discharge of blood ceased. So Jesus is walking through the crowd, and the crowd is pressing him. It's tight. Ancient cities were not made for crowds, so they're not very big. As a picture of modern day Israel, really tight spaces, even just a small group of people, young people pushed together in a hallway. It's tight, right? And as Jackie said, what would happen if this woman touches anyone in that crowd?
They get sick.
Not necessarily sick, because she doesn't have a disease per se that we know of, but they become ceremonially unclean, and they can't go about their religious duties, and they get frustrated. And imagine, what happens if she goes up to Jesus and she says, Jesus, heal me. I have a bleeding problem. What would everyone do if she utters those words, I'm bleeding? Yeah. So it's kind of,
a lot of people going to stay with her.
yeah.
Be like she's a lepers.
Yeah, and so maybe she's been able to hide it a little bit, and so you picture that, because this is not like I'm blind, Jesus, son of David. This is an embarrassing type of suffering. More like the leper than the blind man. It's like the person, imagine you're asking, you go to the doctor and you find out you have a venereal disease. And you're like, I've never done anything that should get me a venereal disease. Why do I have this? But it's shameful, right? And so you go to the doctor, you get bad news, like, oh, I'm diagnosed with cancer. You can tell anyone, you ask for prayer. You're like, I somehow have a venereal disease? It's shameful. You don't want to tell anyone, right? That's this woman's position. But she takes the risk. Because, again, Mark chapter 5 says she heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment, for she said, if I touch his garment, I will be made well. This is not, oh, I might as well try it. This is, I know this will work. Yes, Sylvia?
So I guess so she really believed that her heart that would happen.
Yeah.
Because she believed with so much strength inside her that would come true. So like I said, Jesus had faith.
Mm-hmm.
Because even she touched without faith or doubt, maybe she would never heal.
Yeah.
So that is the power of faith.
Yeah. Alan, was that a hand?
That's what she's saying.
What?
That's what she's saying.
Yeah, she's saying she's saying I will be healed if I touch him.
That's sure it's true.
How does she know it's true? Because she
did.
she has seen Jesus heal other people. She's heard the stories, and she believes that he is sent from God. That he is able to heal her. That he will heal her. She trusts in him.
Can
Yes,
I
Sylvia.
tell you something about this one? Because very similar to in 41 when Jairo, he kneeled or he was prostrated in Jesus' feet
Mhm.
to ask for his daughter.
Yes.
healing. And this woman, when it was, Jesus said, who touched me? And she confessed in front of the people as
Yes.
well. And she confessed her disease,
Yes.
her problem. And so both of them confess in front of the people without
Yeah.
shame.
And both
This
of
is
them
wonderful.
have a lot to lose by doing this.
Yes.
This is not, he is going to look like a fool in front of the Pharisees. He might get kicked out of his position for going with Jesus against the Sanhedrin. She is exposing herself in this regard.
And one person is with a lot of power, and she is a person like in one of us.
Yeah.
Without just no power at all. So Jesus was showing here mercy for both of them. So they don't see the decision of the people, they see the need of the people.
Yeah.
So that's in other words, you are physical status of, how much money you have or not. So it's amazing that if you compare that to examples.
Very different, but the same source of help.
Yes, very different and very different, but the same source.
Sorry.
And both of them that was in the front of them,
Yeah.
God and God don't have difference. What he said, he don't see the position of the man, he see the soul of the person. How you are inside the heart of the man or the woman. He don't see how much money you have or which position you have. This is not, God said, I don't see how you see. That's right.
Was that a hand, Katie?
Yes.
Yes.
Is like her knowing that if she touched him, that she would be well. Is that kind of like we know, even just by reading the Bible, that if we confess our sins, we will go to heaven when we die?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's saying we're getting there. That's exactly what Jesus points her to. Saying how we should trust his words. And you can say in some ways, like Jesus has not made a promise. I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit, but Jesus has not made a promise that he would heal her. He has not made a promise to us that he will always heal us, but what she's trusting in is Jesus' power, that he will do what is right, just as we have to. And so she grabs onto the fringes of his garment. According to Numbers 15, Israelites were to make tassels on the corners of their garments to remind them to obey the commandments. And so this is the idea. She's grabbing, and as he's walking by, just lightly touching these small cords. And so again, she's not like grabbing him and pulling him. She's just making the slightest touch of that, just like reaching her hand, just like with her fingers.
She doesn't want to like make him unclean, or it's a very humble thing.
Yeah.
Basically, I want to be the least bothersome. I don't want to, make him dirty. It's a very humble statement of faith. All I need is just to be near him.
Because she's anything like it, this is unheard of, because when like Elijah or Elisha had to heal someone, they had to lay on top of them, and there'd be this big act. She's like power just radiates off Jesus. I just have to get near him. It'll be okay. She has faith. Faith is making our lives consistent with the truth claims we agree with. I think that's because faith, if it means trust, it's making our lives consistent with the truth claims we agree with. For example, I believe that my body needs exercise. But until I commit myself to exercise, I do not actually trust that it is good for me. Make sense? In the same way, when I commit myself to Jesus, I truly say that will save me from my sins. It takes that commitment act part. There's an action that goes with faith. And so she's doing so. And she probably hoped that she'd get in, get out without anyone knowing, that she could praise God silently to herself for her healing. And if it was you and I, we'd probably let her, wouldn't we? Just keep to herself, just get in and get out. But Jesus doesn't, does he? We see the woman's exposure. Verse 45, Jesus said, "Who is it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. So Jesus knows something is up. He is touched. Something happens. Is a painting of the touching. And he says, "Who touched me?" And Peter, bold-mouthed Peter, thinks it's a ridiculous question, right? He's treating Jesus like an idiot here. He's like, "What are you talking about, Jesus?" And this is one of those embarrassing moments for the future leaders of the church. In her book, Another Gospel, Elisa Childers, who's an apologist, says, historians look for in ancient writings what is called the criterion of embarrassment. It basically means that one of the ways we can judge whether someone was telling the truth is if they didn't leave out embarrassing details about themselves or their story. Right? Because if you wanted to build a church around the Apostle Peter being one of the leaders, you know what you're not going to do? Show him making a fool of himself in front of Jesus, because you want this guy to be trusted. Right? But the Bible is like, no, here's this big mouth idiot again speaking. So Jesus is trying to have a conversation, and Peter is like, "Jesus, look around you. Everyone's around you, pushing on you. What are you talking about, man? You've lost it. Like you're crazy." And we're going, "Peter, haven't you seen what just happened? Like over and over again? Why are you questioning Jesus?" Right? Because it's real. This actually happened. Now Jesus is saying, "No, I know experientially the power went out from me." This is a Greek word that means to know experientially, gnosko, to feel. And we're dealing with the doctrine of God's omniscience here. Jesus is God who has different attributes, and he is omniscient. And we've seen this throughout this. Like, we've seen him know the hearts of the Pharisees, right? And they're like, they didn't say anything, and Jesus knows exactly what they're thinking. At the same time, in John 16:30, even his enemies say, you know all things, and you have no need for anyone to question you. So people are going, Jesus knows what's going on. At the same time, Jesus doesn't seem to know certain things. For example, Matthew 24:36, concerning the day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only. So this is why we need our doctrine of Christ to help us a little bit here, because the doctrine of Christ teaches us that Jesus is fully God, but he's also fully human, and he's one person. But there's a mystery that we can't understand, that sometimes Jesus, who is God, acts very human, and sometimes he acts very God. And what's going on here? Like, it's all one, it's all Jesus, but he truly doesn't know. Now, some people will try and argue and say, oh, he's just trying to expose her, bring it out. But then, why would he say, I felt the power come from me, and say, I know who did it. Come on. Like, he seems to be uncertain here. Not saying he's still omniscient, but the Father knows what's going on, and the Father wants to have Jesus draw this woman out. R.C. Sproul, writing on this, says, the woman didn't have the courage to come and talk to Jesus. She thought she was too insignificant to require the direct and immediate attention of Christ. But here's Jesus, on his way to raise somebody from the dead, followed by multitudes of people eager to witness this extraordinary act. And in the midst of it all, he stops to give his undivided attention to this poor, humble woman. Here we see the compassion and concern of God for the smallest individual in the world. Nobody is unimportant. The dignity of your personality is worth the touch of Christ. This woman realizes she's being called out. So she comes forward, not running, but trembling. The word means to shudder in awe. And she gets in front of everybody, and you know what she does? She tells everyone her story. Again, we've been building this up, an embarrassing story. It doesn't matter if she's done nothing wrong. It's embarrassing. A person was to wait at least 7 days after the end of their discharge, and on the 8th day, they could go to the temple, offer a sacrifice, and be cleaned. So she's still unclean. But she hides none of her story. Again, look down your Bible. It says, she declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. She gives her testimony, and her testimony is embarrassing. It's dirty, it's bloody, and it would make a lot of people, all the very upright religious people, go, what? Why are you telling this in front of people? We don't talk about these things. But Jesus looks at her, and he gives the woman praise. Verse 48, he says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. It's interesting, he says there, made well is the Greek word sozo, which means to be saved. He's saying your faith has saved you. This woman was unwanted, despised, cast off from society, but she had a strong faith that Jesus could save her. She comes up to him, she touches her outer garment, she's healed, and Jesus is amazed at her faith, says it's beautiful, and points her back to the truth. Salvation is by faith alone. Remember, the word faith means trust. But what is the object of her faith? Who does she trust? Jesus. It's not faith in faith's sake. It's faith that I believe this man can save me. And Jesus is saying, yes, I have. Your faith in me is enough. Now, this event is largely an interruption in the story. You think about it here, like they're trying to get to this girl, and this woman comes in. So we have to remember just the power of interruption. In his book, Life Together, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German theologian, says, we must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God. God will be constantly crossing our paths and canceling our plans by sending us people with claims and petitions. We may pass them by, preoccupied with our more important tasks. It is a strange fact that Christians and even ministers frequently consider their work so important and urgent that they will allow nothing to disturb them. They think they are doing God a service in this, but actually they are disdaining God's crooked yet straight paths. So let's do a little application if we were. We're supposed to be like Jesus, right? Yeah. Paul says, 1 Corinthians 11:1, be imitators of me as I am Christ. So is Jesus in a big hurry right now? Yep. But what does he do when this woman needs him? He stops. So he talks about interruptions. Right? And if God is sovereign over everything, are there any interruptions to his plans? No. Proverbs 16:33 says, the lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord, even the rolling of dice. Matt Perman, who's a writer, theologian, has a good book about productivity called What's Best Next. And he says, all productivity practices, all our work, everything is given to us by God for the purpose of serving others. So the most productive thing I can do is love other people. And God constantly is using those interrupted moments of our life as a means of grace to love other people and to shape me and change me, perhaps knock me off my well-beaten path of plans and put us in awareness of other people's lives. I guess there can be times where I'm interrupted so much I'm failing to love someone. Like if Jesus didn't actually go to the girl, which we'll see he does, then he's failing to love someone. But Jesus is actually trusting the Father that he has a plan for right now, and he has a plan for others. The main focus constantly must be love other people. And if other people get in my way of my plans, if I choose, I have to choose what's most loving to them in the moment. Sometimes that means interruption. Sometimes that means, hey, you need to wait. I need to go love this other person right now too, but I'll come back to you. And it's hard to do. We're just so busy all the time. But Jesus was willing to be interrupted. It's 8:02. So, any quick, it's years ago, but any quick comments or things you've learned from this passage? Any thoughts? Pastor Yuri's laughing. I don't know if you want to give us a great insight there.
I wish. Maybe you'll get to next time. So I know you're still continuing.
Yeah.
I don't want to, spoil anything.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember a class I had in Mark in seminary, Dr. Harris. He was pointing out that the common number here is 12 years. So you can make a big deal about it, the moment that girl was born in that same year is when this woman started having the issue of discharge. Just that, this is a story that God was writing. And you might think,
It's an interruption. It makes no sense. So random, right?
But it's not a random, event as far as God's concerned. It's planning for this moment 12 years prior, right?
Yeah.
Now it's tough to think that this woman's suffering for 12 years was part of this plan to lead up to precisely this moment. So we got a Bible study about it, in 2023. But it's just like God's timing and God's plan. It's a much better idea to think that there was a purpose to her 12 years of discharge of blood than to think that there was no purpose for it. That it was just happened and life was tough and then you die. The fact that it was part of a purpose, even her suffering. It's hard when you're in suffering, but we prayed at the beginning for a list of people who are going through suffering. Hopefully it's not 12 years, but you just don't know.
And 12 years is a long time.
Yeah, it is.
And what's crazy is she would have gone off, and she would probably not even realize in that moment that this little girl was also 12 years. And maybe she didn't even realize that until the Gospels start being written, and the apostles start telling the story. She's just like, wait a second, you're telling me that God perfectly planned that?
It's interesting.
Yeah, Jackie.
So is there anything else you learned from this passage? I would say that when frustrations come, when irritations come, to look at it differently, to not allow frustrations or irritations to come, because to trust God that He has a purpose for them, for whatever may come our way.
Yeah. I think Jesus is a good example, and I would argue, and Tyler the theologian, I would argue again that Jesus in his humility wasn't omniscient about what the plan was. He didn't know exactly what was coming next, but he trusted his Father perfectly. And he knew that the Heavenly Father knew exactly what was coming next. And so he's like, what's going on here? I need to address this.
The reason I was laughing is just because, a small church, any given week, you have no idea how much a single phone call can change your whole schedule. Because you get a phone call from someone, it could be an hour-long conversation, or it could be you need to immediately go help or do something. You just don't know. And so I'm not super regimented anyway. I do like planning some things out, but so one of the things I like actually is just I don't know what's going to happen. Any given day, you get a call from Richard, or you get there's some tragedy that's heard, or some joyful news, or someone's in the hospital, or a random person calls, and it's there's a lot of moments like that where it's very prominent. I say that where you will see God had that person call at that time for a reason, and for me to be the one to say answer that call. So I see this, pan out, so to speak, a lot of times. Sometimes it's like, oh, why me? You laugh, okay, there goes my day. Other times, most of the time, well, every time, it's God's plan, and when you think of it that way, it's okay, whatever the phone call was. But yeah, so many times there's days just sidetracked and done from just a phone call.
They say that just one phone call can change your life.
Yeah, that's
Sometimes, depending on what it is. At the very least, this woman reaching out, that changed her life, right?
yeah. I have to do this. I have things I need to get done.
But sometimes if you're going hey, why hasn't Pastor Yuri done this yet? It's probably because one of those phone calls came through. That often happens.
It keeps things interesting, I suppose. You're never at a loss for trusting the Lord to provide.
Yeah. And one of the things I think we'll get into next time is, how did Jairus feel when this is all happening? And I guess as easy as it is, you're in your own heart, you're like, well, I'm so glad, but what about my need? And the Lord provides. But he has to have faith too. A very similar faith to hers.